This afternoon we have a chance to visit a little bit with two colleagues and friends of many, many years, associated both with Potomac Chesapeake Chapter and National Association of College Admissions Counselors for a very long time, and great contributors to the work of those two organizations over those years, Dick and Norma Taliaferro, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them when we get to talking in a few moments. Okay. Dick and Norma, tell me a little bit, for starters, about where you came from in terms of your secondary and post-secondary education, and some of the things you were thinking about in terms of careers as you moved from high school to college and immediately beyond. And we'll talk more about admissions counseling as a profession later.
As I left high school and headed for college, I thought I was going to become a journalist, and I majored in journalism and English in college, and then I thought, well, I might like to do advertising. So I worked for a while in advertising, and then I thought, no, I'd really like to teach English. So I wanted to teach English by going to, first of all, to graduate school in a different part of the country. I was living in Texas, and I wanted to, as some people say, well, I better not say this. I better not say, get the hell out of Texas. That probably even have to be edited. You can edit that out. But I wanted to be in a different part of the world to go to graduate school. And I heard a lot about the University of Virginia in one way or another, and I decided that would be a good place to go if they would have me. And that's exactly where I went. I was fortunate to do my master's degree in English at the University of Virginia. From there, I did teach in Texas for a little while, but then I've eventually returned to Richmond, taught at St. Catherine's School in Richmond. I also got interested in college admission. While I was working in that school, I worked closely with the dean who did the college advising. So I thought, well, I'd like to work in a college, and went then from St. Catherine's to Goucher College in Maryland, which is where I first learned about PCACAC.
Dick?
Well, when I was in high school, two fields that interested me were science and architecture. But when I got to college at Yale, I found out that I couldn't draw very well, freehand drawing, and I was part colorblind. And I was kind of limping through engineering drawing. So I decided, I think I better go in a different direction. So I went to the dean of undergraduate students and said, I'm having difficulties in the direction I'm going, and explained to him more or less what I just said a minute ago. And this dean was known for his very short ways of communicating. And he looked at me and he said, well, what are you going to do about your situation? And I said, well, I need to make up a course in engineering drawing. And I looked on your list, and you said Catholic University had a program that Yale approved of. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to switch to history. And he looked at me and he said, good move. And that was the end of the conversation. So I graduated from Yale in 1955 in history.
Yeah. And you and I have one important influence in our lives that we share in common. We're both graduates of St. Albans School in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
And one other connection is we've both been involved at one time or another in choral music with
Right.
leaders in the field at Washington National Cathedral.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in your case, teaching and then moving on into the college counseling area
Mm-hmm.
came about how?
Well, when I actually started teaching two places, Sunday school at an inner city church in New Haven, Connecticut, and then in the Army in 1956. So I seemed to enjoy doing that. So when I got out of the Army, I decided that maybe I wanted to go back into the education field, and ended up after a year of lay courses at the Episcopal Divinity School, ended up at George Washington University. And who was working for George Washington University was Dal Holmes. And I got a master's degree in religious and with a associate field of intellectual history, and did 2 years as a university teaching fellow in religion, and then worked for the Peace Corps when it first started in the exotic area, not overseas, but at 17th and 8th Street in D.C., and then from there went back into teaching in a small school called McLean School for Boys, then in an inner city school to try to pursue a program that never got funded on helping parents with their children's education and homework at Shaw Junior High School, and then at McLean School for Boys, and then at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. And when the college counselor, Willis Wells, there in 1978, decided he needed to have an assistant, and then in 1981 stepped down entirely from college counseling, then that's when I moved into that profession at that point.
And when the two of you and I got to know one another in more detail and got to work together on a more regular basis, it was, of course, in Alexandria with Norma at St. Agnes and yourself at St. Stephen's. Two schools which were, in a sense, together but apart for a while, and later became one in many other ways. So this is where the three of us really got to know one another a good bit more, and through Potomac and Chesapeake. How did the two of you come to be as active as you were over the years in Potomac and Chesapeake and the national level organization? And tell us a little bit about some of the roles you've filled during that time. Norma is a winner of our Distinguished Afferson Award, and you have labored in all sorts of ways, from financial to secretarial to bailing out the association at a time when we lost our executive assistant and we needed somebody to help in a pinch, and you've both been involved in so many different ways. Talk about those things a little bit.
Norma might tell you about how we first got connected through
By all
college.
means.
Yeah,
By all means.
that may be the story of most interest to more people. Well, I've been at St. Agnes School in Alexandria for quite a long time, and St. Agnes had a brother school named St. Stephen's, but there was no official connection except they were both church schools in the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Virginia. One day I was sitting in my office and the phone rang, and a man I knew at St. Stephen's was on the other end of the line. He said, "Wonder if you'd be willing to give one of my colleagues a ride to this session that you all go to in the spring, this thing called PCACAC. We have a new person in college advising here named Dick Tolliver, and he thought he might like to go with somebody who knew the ropes of the association." I said, "Fine, I'd be glad to take him along." And that is how it turned out that we actually met each other, because although we'd been teaching in those two schools quite a while, we'd never happened to meet each other. So that was our first meeting. I think that was in 1981, when the conference was the famous one that many people have spoken of before, in Ocean City, Maryland, where the dining room was on the top of an ice skating rink, and there was a big rug spread out over the ice. So that was the conference that we went to.
I think that was also the weekend when a northeaster blew in and literally took the door right off the front of the hotel.
It was a cold one, and it did not make you feel that spring was on the way.
It was one of Gene Rayburn's last
No,
conferences.
I think she was around there for maybe 3 or 4 more years. I'm not clear. So that was 81, which I believe was the case. But we had, I'd worked in PCACAC as secretary for a term, and Dick was a secretary later on. Then my biggest challenge with PCACAC came, a number of years later, when I agreed with a great deal of trepidation to be treasurer, to run for treasurer. And, thinking, well, I really will not win, and for some reason I did. Then I had to really be treasurer, and which was a challenge since that was not my field of greatest competence, financial or mathematical. And there were a lot of tasks there, but it was an interesting thing for me, and probably a very improving and expanding thing for me to do too. And so those are probably my two largest assignments as far as specific jobs within the association. And of course, when I was in those roles, those two times, I was part of the meetings that took place, the executive board meetings, and I met a lot of other people through that area.
You might comment on the fact that one of her biggest challenges as treasurer was up until and through there was no budget.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be in that job when it became apparent to us that we probably really needed to have a budget. And, and I thought, this is not my area of greatest expertise, but I think maybe we should talk about this and see what we can set up. So we had a meeting just of some of the people within the association. We agreed, well, we probably should try to do this. And we did eventually get that in place. And it's really hard to imagine now that we functioned without one.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, we got it going. But that was a big challenge,
Mm-hmm.
but worthwhile.
We could give Norma the title of godmother of the budget.
Yeah. That's
Who were some of the folks that you encountered in Potomac Chesapeake and the national organization that have really had an impact on the work that you've done as counselors in independent schools? Any people, notable people that you'd particularly like to mention, and how they've influenced your work over the years?
Well, some of them are the same. I think we both, owe a lot to Joe Monte, and who was, of course, one of the founding people. Joe and I were at the first gathering, I guess, or maybe not the very first, but one of the first gatherings of the people who thought they might like to form this association. This is in 1965. I was working at Goucher College in admissions, and my boss, Mary Ross Flowers, was very influential in trying to get such a group together. So she invited a group of the people from that area to Goucher to have a conversation about it. And the next thing you knew, we were having our first spring conference, which took place in Charlottesville. And I don't remember what the size of the attendance was, maybe 25 or 30. But it was a good time, and it was the beginning of all of this. So Mary Ross Flowers, and she was the person, of course, I was working for in admissions, so she was quite influential and helpful in my life. And then, of course, I've known Joe Monte for a long time, Conrad Warlick, whom I had known in graduate school at UVA, and
Tom Pollard.
Mm-hmm. And Jack Blackburn eventually. Jack was not there at the very beginning. One of the first people I met when I was working at St. Agnes was going to a counselor's luncheon was Marion Flagg, and she was a counselor like me, and I thought this is a really impressive woman. She is really interesting. I'm really glad that I'm in this group and that I'm getting to know her. And there are really all kinds of other people who are helpful to me and whom I enjoyed, and I'm afraid I'm probably going to omit some, and because there are a lot.
Well, I would add Carl Wolf.
Carl, yeah, one of them, and
Marty Wilder.
way back there, somebody I appreciate a lot, Ernie Earn from UVA, and Marty came along later.
And Endow himself.
Endow himself, of course, and then at the very beginning of the chapter, I knew Sally Scott, Charlotte Wilder,
right.
Who came to the conferences, and they were both extremely active. But these people were always willing, if you had a question or problem, to have you call them and say, well, I could really use some help with this, or what would you suggest? And that was really wonderful, the network, to know that it was out there. So I guess that's been true of this group since its beginning.
Bonnie Fitzpatrick.
Bonnie, yeah.
And it's interesting with Joe Monte, Arlene Ingram was another person that influenced me, but she was telling the story of us, how that we first met each other and then worked in separately, and then when the schools merged, we became the two college counselors at the merged school. And so we tell people, well, the schools merged, and then we retired, and we merged.
Yes. Yeah, that was the sequence.
And they gave us, of course, we had our honeymoon, and after the service at the seminary chapel, we had a luncheon in Alexandria. And as part of the wedding, my best man was my brother. My better man was Joe Monte.
Yeah. We're probably the only wedding that has ever been held with a better man.
And a small kind of in the family type wedding. And then about 10 days later, we went to the combined meeting of PCACAC and SACAC, the SACAC, at the down in
Grove
Park Inn, and in Asheville, North Carolina. And at that point, I was the acting executive director, and unknown to me, they gave us another reception. The people there leading the PCACAC conference at the Grove Point Inn, and also what was known to me but wasn't known to Norma was that I think that was the year you got the Apperson Award.
Oh yeah, that was a big surprise. I thought, that person they're talking about sounds sort of like me when they got to a certain point. And I thought, but surely not. You know, surely not. So that was a lot of excitement for 1 week to get married, have 2 honeymoons, and receive the Apperson Award. It was almost more than I was able to grasp, but it was wonderful.
Tell us a little bit about how you feel the college counseling landscape has changed over the years since you first got involved. I shared a few thoughts of mine about that last night during a panel discussion, and how is it different today as you look at it from the way things were when you began?
Norma was reacting to the session we just went to this morning about the technology.
Well, of course, that's probably one of the most obvious differences. The fact that there's so much technology that's out there ready to, I guess, on the whole, help with counseling. At an instant's notice, we went to the session that had to do with member to member, and which they were talking about the connections through Facebook and any number of other things that have really changed the work of a college advisor, just having to keep up with those things, with those avenues. So those are huge changes, but I think no matter which changes you're speaking of, the goal is always the same. I think that's the same as when I began. The goal to help students in every way you can to find the right path and make the connections for their futures. That part really is not very different, although the means for getting there have changed.
And I still do a little bit of independent counseling, and have seen how much, well, the students get so much of their information from the web or from social network sites. And when we went to the college counselors' college fair today, the representative of University of Virginia was telling us they now have a paperless office, no files. Everything's on the computers. And
Unthinkable in 1964.
That's right. And we said, what happens if the system goes down? They said, we have some serious backup systems and our own generators, and at most we'd be down for 2 hours. And one admissions person said, kind of reflecting their pressures, it would be nice if it was more than that.
Sometimes we'd like a longer break. So.
Well, I was sitting with Suzanne Callaghan at lunch today, and she was talking about how her younger colleagues at Georgetown Visitation have provided the impetus for that school going essentially paperless.
Really?
And the challenges in doing that, and how she's been able to adjust with the help of the next generation of college counseling professionals.
And speaking of changes, though, I went out, I guess it was in the early 1980s. There was no computers in the college office. And I went out and bought one and donated it to the school. And I said, I think we need to do something on a computer. Some people looked at me, why? I said, well, A, it's the coming thing. 2, it's going to enable us to do all the myriad jobs that involve records much more efficiently. And I guess since they didn't want to argue with me, since I provided the school with a computer, and they didn't have to think about it, except to show in other changing times. At that point, the school had a few more computers, but no permanent technologically person in this whole big school. And so one time my computer seemed to be having difficulties, so I walked up to the dean of the 9th grade students and said, who's the brightest kid you can find that you have that has some technical skills? And I said, do you know one? He said, yes. I said, send him to me. So this kid arrived at the door, and I said, my computer's doing strange things. I wonder if you could possibly fix it. So he kind of tampered around with it a little bit, and sure enough, he got it to working, and his reward was 2 chocolate chip cookies. And I went to one of the school administrators, and I told him the story, and he said, that's wonderful. He said, when we have to hire somebody to come into the school, we have to pay him $75 just to cross the threshold. That's before he charges us for other things that he might do. So that gives you a kind of, compared then with now, you can see there's been a big difference.
I said to someone the other day, it's my opinion that no one should ever attempt to teach a member of his or her immediate family how to drive either a car or a computer unless it's your 9-year-old grandchild.
Yeah, it's a big chasm out there, a big chasm.
I'll bet you both have a lot of memorable experiences working one-on-one with particular students along the way, or particular Potomac and Chesapeake stories that are fond memories. Can each of you give us one of those before our time is over this afternoon?
I should have been thinking about
What about
this.
Nadej? That's quite a story.
Well, yes, although I don't think, well, I guess through the connection with Hood College. Dick is reminding me of a student that we had at St. Agnes School who was from Haiti. And she had studied English in Haiti. She had the opportunity through various people to come to the United States and attend St. Agnes School for an additional senior year. She had already graduated from a secondary school in Haiti, but she really had ambitions to come to the United States and study. She was quite a talented violinist, and she was very strong in French, which of course was one of her native languages, but she was just a very strong linguist. And so she had the opportunity to come and live in the home of our head of school for that year, and then with our help, school's help, we were to find her a college, and we hoped a sizable amount of financial aid. And at that point, and I think things have changed, probably some in that way, we're talking about, say, the mid-1980s. There really was not very much out there in the way of financial help for students from foreign countries. That certainly nothing through the U.S. government at all. But even from the colleges themselves, there was not very much, especially when they needed a substantial amount. And but I decided, well, one way to try to find out some of the avenues would be to ask people in PCACAC for this kind of knowledge or help. And eventually, I was very fortunate and found that at Hood College in Frederick, one of our regional connections, Hood was very willing to talk about providing a sizable amount of aid for a Fordham student who was qualified. And I'm trying to remember, I think the Dean of Admissions at Hood at that point was Phyllis, whose last name is...
Phyllis Gill.
Well, it wasn't, but Nadej eventually was offered a very nice scholarship at Hood College, thanks to Phyllis, my PCAC connection there. And she went on and graduated, did receive her degree from Hood. And it was a very generous thing that they did. And I will always be thankful to Hood, but also to the fact that I knew somebody in that college that I could connect with. And that was because of PCACAC.
That was, I guess, after the merger, wasn't it? I think she stayed in Jones' house there on
Yeah.
St. Stephen's Road.
Yeah, I think we had the merged school, but just barely.
Just barely
I
merged,
think
right.
so, yeah.
And I can think of two interesting cases. One's kind of amusing and one isn't. One is more important than amusing. And the first one was a young man who was extremely bright, who announced to me at the church school that while he was a junior and I was helping him get all of his papers together and describing the process of applying to college, that he was an atheist, and said, I guess I should go to chapel. And I said, has anybody in chapel ever told you what to think about or believe? And he said, well, no. I said, well, you can just think your own thoughts. Well, fortunately, he seemed to get along with that just fine. So he applied to college. His parents were originally from India. And he got accepted. He got accepted to the college in Cambridge, England. And the name of the college was Jesus College, which I thought was pretty ironic.
Yeah.
The other case was a young man who wanted to take AP Economics. And so when I was sitting down, the economics was part of the history department, and talking to the head of the history department, they said, well, he wants to take AP Economics. Are you going to admit him? And I said, he wants to do it very badly. He said, oh, but he has a learning disability. I said, well, he's got a very strong motivation. And she said, well, it's your call. I said, I'm going to try him. And I did, and he worked very hard. He needed extra time on both the SAT and also sometimes in class. And we have an honor system, and one time he wanted to take an economics test, and I knew I was going to run out of time before I had to go to a faculty meeting, so I just said, take the test in my office, and you get finished, put it on my desk, and I'll be in the faculty meeting, and you can go home. So that's what he did, and he applied to college, got admitted to James Madison University, and his major was economics, and that's what he graduated at.